Marshall, and this is my hex nymph. It's a pattern that I sort of made up on my own. It's based on several other patterns, but the idea was to improve the gills that I've been seeing on other patterns. A lot of the patterns use ostrich or something along that line, run along the side of the nymph, which does work, but I don't think they're vibrant enough. So I started looking around for alternative materials and found that the phyllo plumes left over from tying pheasant feathers into various patterns sort of made a good approximation of gills. So what I'm going to do is first off tie in the tail, for which I use old gold ostrich, just the tips of a couple of these fibers. There's 3 tails on this nymph, so I just want to take 3 nice pointed fibers and take the tips off. I can find 3 nice fibers. Here we go. They're fairly short, so there needs to be, they're kind of bushy too, and you want to take and tie them in. If I can get them, there we go. Tie them in and splay them. So we'll take and run them like so. There's a really nice hex hatch. This is where I ran into the adults in Lake Chelan up in Washington. It's a good place to find them. Okay, and then I'll take and wait. Well, I don't think I will. So, and then what I'll do is I'll tie in the rib. For the rib, I use a fine gold wire. It just needs to be something that's strong enough to separate the fibers, wide enough to separate the fibers, but not enormously blatant obvious, because there's a nice segmented effect on the nymph, but it's not like a gold-ribbed hare's type nymph. There's not big segments. For body, I use hairline Dovin's olive brown. Occasionally I'll take and add in a bit of the creamy olive if I want to make it a bit more olive-ish. Actually, I skipped a step here. I have to tie in the phyllo plume. For the gills, I'll take this phyllo plume, which you find on a lot of the pheasants, and I tie it in by the tip. This is a kind of a tricky little operation here, because a lot of the time it wants to break as you pull it forward over the body. So I'll do this like so, and we just hope it holds when the time is right. I tie it in by the tip because it makes the fibers point forward, so as the nymph is pulled through the water, the action of the water pushes the fibers back and makes them breathe in a nice natural sort of movement. We'll take and dub in the body now. I like this hairline dubbin. It goes in nice. It's got a nice bit of yellow to accent the sort of yellowish that the hex nymph has, but it's not this bright fluorescent stuff that I've seen occasionally that looks too artificial to me anyway. Get a nice underbody going there. It's a long, slender nymph, so we want a long, slender body. You can weight this if you want. I do sometimes I don't. If I'm going to, I'll run the wire around the hook as opposed to how I usually weight nymphs, which is to run the wire alongside the hooks, because the running alongside the hooks gives a broader body that this doesn't need. Nice, even body here. go. You can nip that off. And then take and wind the ribbing with the assistance of a little pick here. Wind the ribbing over and around, get a nice gild look to it. Sort of like wrapping a matuka, only the feather lays flat rather than standing upright. You have to keep that stem running down the middle. It always wants to run off to one side or the other. And what you can do, I've done this occasionally with other, because I use this method of gilling on a lot of my nymphs to give color to the back, is you can take like some bronze mallard or some lemon wood duck or maybe some pheasant fibers and tie them in first, and then tie the phyllo plume over, and then when you pull the phyllo plume in and tie it in like you've done here, then you pull those fibers over the back to give some color to the back. If there's like a speckled sort of pattern on the nymph that you want to mimic, and then do the ribbing over the top of that. So taking this will work eventually. Okay, that looks good. Looks good. Then we'll take. So the next thing I do is I'll take and tie in the wing case, which in this case I use turkey. I'm using a turkey tail covert here. I prefer the coverts because they're a softer material, less likely to split and cause problems in being tied in. They have a real nice color to them, like the tails do. So like I said, you'll see here it's a nice, softer material. It's, in my opinion, much better for using than actual turkey tails. We'll tie that in there. And I like fairly dark coverts, and because the nymph itself has a small, dark wing case when it's about to emerge. For legs, I use the dark feathers on the Hungarian partridge shoulder. Let's see. That one looks like a good one there. And I'll tie those in, strip out the waist here. Tie those in by the tip. There we go. So we get that nice speckled part. We get a nice taper going front to back. That's just sitting there. Dug some more dubbing in for the thorax. Again, we keep this nice slender nymph, like the natural. Let me put a little bit more, just a touch more. fish really care if this thing has eyes or not. But I like eyes on nymphs. I think if they have prominent eyes, we should put eyes in there. And so for eyes, I use 30-pound monofilament. I'll take about a 3/4 inch piece, and with a lighter I will burn it so that you have small. I did these up earlier because it takes time to do them. I'll have little black burnt eyeballs on each end of this. I'll take and tie that in with a figure 8. Okay, tied in real good and tight. I like to use lots of wraps, get this thing good and tight in there. Okay, and then we'll try and dub in some more dubbing. We can do this a little bit looser to sort of fuzz up the head a bit. But we don't want to do it too loose, because we want to keep that nice, streamlined, almost fish-like effect this nymph has. A little bit much there, we need to take some of that off. Then we bring this over the top. And we trim out the waist there. Okay, and then to finish it, since I usually use a whip type knot of my own sort of devising, because I never did learn how to use the whip finishing tools, I'll take a piece of 6-pound leader material, make a loop, and whip that in there. A couple turns around that, 6 or 8, 10 turns, give it a few, and then take and hook the tying thread through the loop. Of course, you're going to want to use your own form of finishing knot, and then I'll take and pull that loop up through the wraps. Trim it off there. A little bit of head cement. And there you go. She's done.
Okay, the main thing I wanted to do is show you how that loop is tied on this shaft. Now this shaft is off of a 3/0 hook that you've clipped the basic turn in it where the hook end would be, and left it as just a shaft, and you're working on the shaft. And this is what we've done over here. We've tied some basic white body hair on this piece of 3/0, and you can even use 4/0 hook that's been clipped off, and I put it in this vise and it holds very steady. Now, and you taper this, of course. Then you come out of here and you look for something that'll kind of set this thing off. And you don't have to use a lot of this. This is just to kind of be on the body. And so we cut this off and leave about that much that I have in my hand here to kind of make sure that the white body here does give it a little reflection. As you see a fish in the water, you'll see there is a reflection off the body, and I think this has been developed very well by these people that made it to utilize as a reflection off the plain body. Our next look is into a pink median line, which generally occurs not every year, but it generally, I mean not all year, but it generally occurs most of the time going into the fall, and you see the bait has a little bit of a pink look to it, so we're going to do some of that. And we put the pink in place, and I taper it like this by pulling on the other ends. And then we lay it across and tie her down a little bit, clip off the excess, and try and keep from messing up everything you got on the floor here. So we just tie that on with just a few wraps of this monofilament. This is 6 pound or 4 pound mono, and you put out a spool, take a spool, an empty spool, and run it on there, and then put your spool back on the on your bobbin here, and it ends up pretty darn good. You'll see as we go here that taking some of the shine or some of the differences out of the head and the things that are put on there helps you an awful lot. Makes it look better. Now we're going to be a little sparse with this, but we're not going to be too sparse. Now we measure. Take the excess hair out of there, but you're at the end of a program here. Sorry, I should have showed you that. Just nip this off so you can handle it, and set it aside. And we've got the makings of the top of the fly, which represents the top of the body of the bait fish. And you want it to taper a bit, so you make them a little bit short in one way and a little bit longer in the other way, which I'm trying to do here. And there, I got it. And then we put it on here and see how it's going to be. and we nip it off. Lay it over the top. After, we're all set now to do some special things, and I'll try and show you what the special things are. Excuse me. We got that pink across there, and then to give it a little bit of a shine and make it feel like it's more part of the fly. We just kind of taper that too into a cover there. You do this sparse. It's should be pretty sparse on there, but it doesn't hurt to put in a little extra. It just offsets the pink color, and the people that put this together just did a wonderful job, and what they did here to help us fly tires that experiment a little bit, and you can find leaving something on or off makes a tremendous difference when you get out there and it's a tough day or wind's blowing hard, and you got to kind of fish down the trough of the water you're working, and to have that additional sparkle there. So you don't worry about the head. Some guys try to trim this down so there's no head on the fly. Well, there's going to be a head on this one, and it's for a reason. You build up an area here on the front, and I'll show you what we do then. This goes a little bit longer, and you want to trim it a little bit first. Put her on the top. And you want to taper it toward the eye, even though it's a lot of mono, it looks like, on there. There's still would be more to come. And that gives you the basic colors plus the offsets and making the thing a little bit more impressive to fish with. Now we got a purple on top, so we got some purple to put on there too, and that kind of gives it quite a boost when the sun is low or whatever, and it just helps you catch more. It makes your materials come alive, kind of. It helps. And I'm trying to build a good, strong front on this thing, and then we're fairly well shaped, and then we come to an eye. These are sometimes hard to do, but I like to do them. I think they do that much good. And a guy that ties and has tied flies up in Canada for many, many years says it's a point for the fish to strike the eye, and it sets it off, and by golly, it does, and I've noticed that. And then put this on both sides, but I'll put this on this side, and I'll show you how to put the other one on. Now I got that baby on there, and I just wrap over it, a few turns, and then I can turn it toward me and put the other eye on. Sorry about this delay here, but harder to get them off the thing you're using than it is the stuff that it's attached to. Well, it's, and you kind of want to make these so they're about the same distance from the nose to both sides. So now we're going to try and do that, which we've done. And we've wrapped that very good and very hard. And now we're going to put a little bit of head cement on. As soon as I get this thing to a point where it's ready to go, and I take these turns and it kind of seals that on there and makes a nice firm finish. And you kind of clean it up where there's little spicks of that and spicks of this, and then you take your whatever cement you're using, and I like the clear best, and this happens to be hard as nails fingernail polish, and it's just worked out great for me. Now if you watch this, the colors come out again through the colors will come out again through the monofilament that you wrapped on there, because it makes it almost invisible when you put the head cement on. And it's a step forward, frankly, the monofilament. And all fish don't have black heads. But I think this is a nice one to have. Now I'm going to show you about putting a, and then I'm going to show you another, and I'll take one of these. When I take it off of here, I put a toothpick in there and set her up here to dry. As soon as that head cement is dry, then we'll run it in through this thing of hot water, and it helps to shape the fly. So you run it through the hot water, and then like this, come out and just kind of straighten out the hair and lay it on there to dry, and it dries so it's very attractive. When I was guiding, it took me a long time to realize that after you've used flies in salt water, you should take them out and run them through hot water and lay them out to dry with the right shape, because you'll be going against the wind and the fly is hooked into the where the rod is. And the front end of the rod is going to the front end of the boat, and the fly is hooked into the bottom side. So when you're when you're coming back or going somewhere else, it blows that hair all over. And this kind of gives them, when you put them in hot water and then lay them out to dry, it gives them a better shape and an easier shape to keep while you're fishing. I'll just touch this once. We'll do it anyway. We'll put this in here and move it around a little bit there, and then kind of straighten it out. And what it's made you is a fish shape, or I mean a bait shape that sits there, and then you can trim your edges on here that may not be up to your liking, and we set her aside to dry. The way that Mrs. Nelson came about is I guided a guy from South Africa that was a very nice part of of our life, and we had built a home on the beach of Quadra Island, and we were about 200 yards from April Point Lodge, where guys would stay, and the lodge provided boats and guides. And I fished this man from South Africa. His name was William, and we fished down at the south end of the island. Had a couple of fish takes, and he played it very well. And on the console of my Boston Whaler, I had plastic net buoy, and I stuck it in a hole that was in my console, and I kept my flies in there. And he was coming, we were training, and he says, what's that fly there that's stuck in that net float there? And I said, well, that one is a fly I tied for my wife, and she likes it very much. And then he says, you think Mrs. Nelson would mind if I tried that fly? And I said, I think she'd be honored. And so we put that fly on, and there's a little cove, so we went in the cove, and he cast 10 times and had 8 hookups on that fly. And we had to go in for lunch, and I didn't eat in the lodge, but of course the guests eat in the lodge, and I went home to have lunch. And when I got back, why, he'd been having lunch with all of the guides and other guests, and he said, told the story about Mrs. Nelson's fly. And that kind of was picked up by the guides and a lot of the guests, and they were asking, well, I want to fish with a Mrs. Nelson. And for a minute there, I didn't realize what they're talking about. And I said, well, I didn't think Aubrey wanted to go out there and fish every day. And he said, no, the Mrs. Nelson fly. And that's how it got its name. And that's been over 25 years that it's been the Mrs. Nelson up there. And it's sold in Canada over the counter. And there's a lot of the guides up there that tie it themselves. And I still hear from them. And I appreciate how it came out. And my wife is quite happy with it too. So you've seen the story here, and outside of putting a hook on that loop, which we should do, is you take the loop and run it through the eye of a hook like this. A 2/0 is good, and then you put it back through it, and it'll just hang there. If you wreck the hook, you can take it off and put on a new one. You don't have to cut up a fly just to change it. And this is 25-pound mono that loop is made of. And you might try it. It really works good. And I thank you for being here, and I enjoyed it.
Hello today, my name is Damian Nuri, coming to you from Flying Field Outfitters in Bend, Oregon, where I've been guiding down on the Lower Deschutes River for the past 6 years. And in my time down there, I have developed a fly used during the salmon fly hatch. I'm going to be tying the Sport Utility Stone today. It's a really fun fly to fish. It's a little bit unique. We'll actually be able to use kind of a skated principle while fishing it. There's a lot of foam on here, so this thing is just going to float like a cork. First thing I've done, I've started with a 200R size 4 hook. I've got some Flymaster Plus orange thread that I've already pre-wrapped on here. First thing we want to start with is my egg sac. So I'm going to take some black crystal flash, take a small piece, tie this back, quite a ways, about to your hook point, where I'm going to start my crystal flash tying that in. Once I've got that, I'm going to double this over to create a little egg bubble. This is going to simulate the egg sac of a female stonefly as fluttering down, landed in the water, and dropping its eggs. And I wrap underneath a few times just to kind of elevate that egg sac. Now we can trim that right off. Oops, left a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go actually wrap all the way forward again. And this is the point that I'm going to lay down the head of the fly. And for that, I'm going to use some wing cutters. These are spent wing salmon fly or stonefly wing cutters. I'm going to use some black 2mm foam. Just going to take this and stamp it out. Sometimes you got to press really, really hard. Get a nice piece of foam out of there. Place that right on top there. I'm going to set this out just past the hook eye. Wrap that down, give it 3 good thread wraps, and then I'm going to wrap back, pulling back on the foam towards the bend of the hook, just to pull that and tighten that piece of foam so I can secure it to the hook shank. And I'll go all the way back, burying that piece of foam. Next, I'll actually go wrap forward again one last time, and then back. And now that piece of foam is in there nice and tight, and it also is going to build a nice body taper. Next step is going to be to take some orange antron, cut a liberal piece of this. I'm going to secure this in just in front of my egg sac, wrapping all the way back to the final wrap of my egg sac. Trim that tag right off of there. Okay, now I'm going to take a piece of this black foam again. It's just a rectangular piece. I'm going to trim it down a little bit, create a little bit of a taper to it. Now I'm going to place this in, and I'm going to leave it hanging out just a little bit over the egg sac, about halfway over the egg sac. Secure that down with 3 or 4 good thread wraps. Now I'm going to pull the foam back and wrap all the way forward, leaving about 1 hook gap back from the eye. This is where we take our antron that we tied in earlier, twist it a little bit. We don't want to twist it real tight to make a ropey feature. We want this to all lay down nice and flat. But if you don't twist a little bit, you'll get some stray fibers. So I'm going to wrap over once, following where I've just secured that piece of foam down. Wrap under 1, 2, 3 times. Pull this piece of foam down. Now I'm going to wrap right over the top of that, creating the first body segment. I'm going to continue all the way up, doing that process up to this where I've left the thread. 1, 2, 3, and over. 1, 2, 3, and over. And I think we can get one more segment in there. 1, 2, 3, and over. Just secure that in. Trim it off. Then I'll bury the rest of that just to make sure it's in there nice and tight. Take a look at what that segmentation looks like at that point. Here's what the fish will see from that side. Now what we're going to do is take some ether wing foam. This stuff has a mottled pattern on it with some foam on this side. I'm going to take this time my big wing cutter, stamp that out. Now the nice thing about ether wing foam is I have the wing pattern. I also have a little more foam for durability. Sometimes I will actually just pull that foam right off of there. Today we're going to leave it on to add that extra durability. One thing that I want to make very clear, we want to try and always use the mottled side down. That's what the fish is going to see. I'm going to place that in, measuring so it's about the same length as the egg sac. Nice and flat on top, and just secure that in. Okay, so there's wing one. Next, I'm going to add some orange crystal flash. Just a modest amount. We don't need too much. Just something enough to get that fish's attention. I'm going to lay it down. It's going to be about the same length of that wing that I just tied in. Secure with 3 good thread wraps. And I kind of like to just splay it out a little bit so that it's not hidden by that wing. I'll trim the front. We've used a lot of foam so far, but I think we still need a little extra. So what we're going to do is take that small wing cutter again. And this time I'm only going to use about half the wing cutter to stamp out a piece of foam. And now I'm going to lay this again on top. And it's only going to go back, maybe a quarter of the length or a third of the length of this ether wing foam. I will secure this and then just bury this foam to continue to build that body taper up towards the eye of the hook. Display that out a little bit. Now we'll go and use some of the more traditional materials in fly tying, some elk hair. Really, this is about the only traditional material in this fly. Take a fairly liberal piece of elk hair. Going to discard the underfur and the smaller hairs to my wastebasket here. Pull out the hair stacker. Slide these in. I want to even the tips of these hairs. Once I have them nice and even, I can pull them out. And now I can kind of try to get just the longest hairs out of there. Going to secure these in at this same point where I put this last foam wing in. And on this one, I don't like to go all the way back to the ether wing foam. I'll leave it, maybe 3/4 of the length of the ether wing foam. Going to secure that down nice and tight. That's the beauty of this Flymaster Plus. You can really reef on it. So right now it's sitting right on top, but I want to kind of roll it off the hair onto either side. Just pull it a little bit. Make sure as you're doing that, that's nice and even. Now what I'm going to do, pull out a little piece of orange foam today. This is 2 mil orange foam. That's what I have handy. This is going to become my indicator on top of the fly. Just a small little piece. It's going to go right on top there. Notice I haven't cut these butt sections yet, the butts yet. This will only take, about 2 wraps. Right now I want to really concentrate on not wrapping too much. We're going to add some rubber legs. These are speckled rubber legs. They are speckled with brown and black. Them in half, and then I'm going to place one on each side of the fly. Okay, so now we've got rubber legs on both sides, the first set of rubber legs, and we're getting close to the final product of this fly. I like to use the ice dubbing. Today we're going to use some brown ice dub. This again adds a little bit of flashiness to the fly. Slide that right up to the hook shank. And I don't overly dub this. I want this to be a fairly tight dub. I really like this ice dubbing. It goes on very easily. Minimal effort. Got a little there. Now I'm going to take and pull all the hair back with the rubber legs, and I'm going to wrap this right up tight underneath, actually wrapping at an angle back a little bit. Once I have that, I'm just going to wrap forward, making sure not to leave any gaps, right to my head. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull the butts of this elk hair forward, making sure sometimes this little rubber leg on this side will get in your way. What you can do is actually just tuck it into your wing, between your wings for now. That'll keep it out of your way as you finish the fly. Go ahead and pinch that down. Wrap that around a few times. Secure those butt sections in there. We're almost done. Don't want to trim these just yet. That's my final step. Do need to add some more rubber legs. Again, one on each side. You can always make sure it goes into quite the right position that you need it to. Make 2 more tight securing wraps before you whip finish. We are just about there. Now I'm going to whip finish, trying to keep from bunching up any of these butts of these hairs. Grab my whip finish tool and just kind of make it happen. Trim that off. grab these butts, trim these off just to the top of the foam there, making sure not to snip any of your rubber legs. And that's about it. That is your sport utility stone. You can see here this foam in front. It'll actually keep the fly floating longer, but it helps it kind of skate and skitter. With these rubber legs on the side and this hair wing standing nice and tall, it acts like a skittering salmon fly, helpless, ready to be preyed upon. That's it.
Hi, my name is Hal Gordon, and I live in Aloha, Oregon, and I want to show you one of my favorite dry flies, and I call it the perfect parachute. And this version of the perfect parachute will be the purple haze. And to tie the purple haze, I've got a size 16 dry fly hook here, and I'll start wrapping a thread just on the front third of the hook. And I'll end the thread about where I want my post. And then I'm going to use white polypropylene yarn for the post. I'm going to tie that in horizontal, and I'm going to take 3 wraps of thread over the top. I'm going to pull it back and do 3 wraps in front, and then 3 wraps in back. Then I'm going to go ahead and wrap the thread up the post to make it stiff. So I'm going to hold the bobbin in my right hand and not let go of it. I'm just going to hold onto the bobbin, grab the thread with the post with my left hand, and slowly wrap it up the post and then back down the post. And the trick here is not to pull your thread too tight. Then I'm going to end the post right there in front, and I'm going to tie on my hackle, and this will be a blue dun hackle. I'll tie it in vertically so the shiny side of the feather is facing towards me, and I'll tie it right in front of the post. Then I'll bring the thread behind the post. Then I'm going to tie the stem of the hackle up the post to make it more rigid. So I'll twist the hackle and wrap it right up the post like that. So now the hackle is flat with the shiny side pointing directly up on the top of the post. Then I'll wrap the thread back down and a couple wraps behind the post. Now I'm going to tie on a split tail. I'm going to use micro fibets here. I'm going to put 2 fibets on each side of the split tail. I'm going to go ahead and cut these off and tie them directly behind the post like this. Take about 3 wraps. And it's very important with this fly not to have any thread going back on the hook shank. You want a bare hook shank so that when the fibets are tied in, they stay on top of the shank and are side by side and level together. So I'm going to pull those fibets up at a 45-degree angle and slowly wrap on top of the bare hook shank back to where I want the tail to end. And my last wrap of thread, I'll lock in that thread by wrapping forward again one more time to lock that in. It's very important to get that forward wrap, because if you don't, if you use loose thread, the tail will flip over. So lock it in with a forward wrap. Now I'm going to take the thread underneath the tail like that. Let's see. take it underneath the tail, one more wrap to lock it in, and your tail just split just a little bit. Now I'm going to take a wrap of thread right between the two tails, forward, another lock wrap of thread, and one more time between the tail. Pull a little bit tighter this time to lock it down. And there you've got a perfectly split tail, two fibets on each side. Then I'll wrap forward again just to secure that tail and clip the ends of the tail off. Now I'm going to dub a body here, and this is superfine dubbing, and it's in purple. So I'll take a little bit there, and I want a carrot-shaped body that tapers towards the wing post. So I'll just dub a little bit of dubbing on the thread there. And most people dub too much. And this fly you need just a very little bit of material to make it work. And you don't want to let the dubbing touch your tail at all, or it'll skew it off to one side. So just barely kiss the tail back there. Wrap your body forward, get that carrot shape, and wrap the entire body, even past the post there. And then when you get to that point, you want to take a wrap of thread around the post and let the thread hang right in front of you. Now we're going to wrap the hackle. You want that hackle to wrap spiraling down the wing post, and you only need about 4 or 5 wraps, because only the last 2 wraps really hold the fly on the water. And so don't over hackle this fly. Now a lot of people will try to tie a parachute hackle off right there behind the eye of the hook. I never do that because I can never trim the feather close enough to keep it away from the eye, and you're always getting cement there. So I always tie the hackle off on the post. So to do that, you bring the hackle down and wrap the thread 3 times around the base of the post, like that. Then you bring the hackle up, and you take 3 more wraps around the post there. That secures that hackle between thread that's pulling up and pulling down, and it's very secure there. Now at this point, pull everything back out of the way, bring the thread forward to the eye, and just tie it off. And we'll put a couple half hitches on there. And then I'll use my scissors as a knife to cut that thread to get it as close as I can. And then we'll trim the hackle stem off there. This time I'll grab that post, make sure all those hackles are laying flat down like that. Now mayflies don't have flat top wings, and so we want to cut this wing at an angle to make it kind of look like a sail. So pull pretty tight, trim there, and then you've got a nice angle right there. So that's the purple haze. It's a purple parachute. Now some people ask, why purple? Most mayflies are gray or cream or olive or dark brown. We tied this in purple because I like to use it late in the day when the sun is low on the horizon. You get more ultraviolet light going through there, and the best color to pull up ultraviolet light is purple. So this is a good late afternoon, early evening fly, and had a lot of success with it. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Stu Stewart. I'm from Shingletown, California, and I'd like to tie for you today one of my favorite lake patterns, which is called the Stewie Fly. I'm using the 3761 size 10 hook, although I do tie it in size 8 and 10, and also in some smaller size. I'm using the 1/8 gold beads, and a little pointer on this that you really don't need to, for the 3761 and the 3769 and the 2457 and the 2487, you really don't need to have the counter drilled beads, which run about $2.50 for 25, and you can buy the regular beads for about $6 for 1,000 of them. So I go ahead and put the bead onto the hook. And go ahead and put it into the vise. I'm using a partridge for the tail, and I like the gray partridge down by the neck area, and I normally just strip off the soft below and pull off one side for the tail. Get my thread on there. Take the thread all the way back to the tail, and I put it right over the barb, and then attach the tail. I like to take one wrap and go under the tail to lift it up a little bit. I'm using, instead of doing the regular dubbing, I use dubbing brushes, and it's a lot faster for me, but if you wanted to do dubbing, you could use the Bob Borden's Hairline Hare's Ear Plus, which has the Intron in it. Go ahead and tie in the dubbing brush, and I go all the way forward just behind the bead. I go ahead and lock it into place with about 3 wraps over the top of it, and go ahead and cut the dubbing brush off. I go ahead and take the dubbing brush and push it back because I'm going to taper my body, and what it's done, it's allowed me room to go ahead and put my legs in. So again, I use the gray partridge, and I like to tie in by the tip, and I found with this particular fly it really isn't critical to take half of it off or do 1 or 2 wraps. I usually just take a feather about like this, and then I go ahead and just tie it until it's, you get the stem on it. So I tie it in by the tip. If the hackle goes forward, I don't worry about it, because what I'm going to do is after I get it wrapped on, I'm going to pull it back towards the back of the hook anyway, so it isn't critical. As you can see, some of the fibers have gone forward. So then I go ahead and grab a hold of them and pull it back and wrap back towards the back of the hook, towards the tail section, and this pushes them back. So you can see how they're laying back a little bit. If you want them back a little farther, you can go ahead and put a couple more wraps. Then I take the peacock. This is going to be my thorax area. I go ahead and take about 3 of those, and I tie in by the tips, so I cut a little bit off to get them even. go ahead and tie them in at the front. And I like to put my peacock on with a dubbing loop. So I make a small loop. I pull the peacock down one side of the thread and go ahead and take your hackle pliers and go all the way down to the bottom of the loop and lock it into place. Then you can go ahead and twist your peacock to make a little rope out of it. I do about 3 wraps with the peacock, and then I go ahead and lock it in place. I like to get a little head cement in the peacock area, and if you dab it on, it's going to get all over everything. So what I do is I put it on the thread. Put a little dab on the thread, and then I go ahead and run it up into the peacock. Go ahead and take your whip finisher and go ahead and put a whip finish on it. And that's all there is to the Stewie fly. I like to fish it with an intermediate line, and as I indicated, it's primarily a lake fly for me, although I've had reports from people all over the country that have actually used it in streams, and a lot of them will use size 14 down to 16 also. So thank you very much, and hope you have a great time with the Stewie fly.
Hello, this is Vic Loisel. I'm from Pocatello, Idaho, and I'm going to tie an emerger pattern for you, March Brown. And we'll see, it's a simple fly that you probably, if you're a starting tyer, would be a real good pattern for you to tie. So we'll get started. The materials in this fly are pretty simple, really. There's the TMC 900BL hook is what I'm using. And I'll explain the materials as we go along here, but the first thing I'm going to do is build a body and put the hackle fiber for the tail, the shuck. So we're using brown thread. This fly can be tied in a variety of colors because it's basically mimics the gray drake. And which is, there's a gray and a green and the brown drake, so you have a variety of things you can do with it, and you can pick a little bit different coloring if you want, depending on the fly. What I'm doing now is I got the brown hackle feather, and I'm making a shuck, and that's basically looks like a tail, but it's still a shuck, and it's going to be stick out about the length of the gap of the hook, so, or maybe even a hair more is what I tend to like to do. Tie it in and secure it down. So I leave the material all the way up to help build up the body. And then you can see what we got there. Bring the thread back to the rear so we can tie some dubbing. And the dubbing that I use is a fine olive brown dubbing. This happens to be Angler's Choice, but whatever you feel you like to use. You can use dubbing wax, put it on. I don't do that. I use just dampness from my mouth, so I'm going to dub the fly now to get a body going here. Up in Idaho, the Snake River country, this is a good fly on Henry's Fork, and Henry's Fork, as most of you people know, is pretty famous fishing water, so it's one of the very good places to use this fly, along with many others. I'm going to build a tapered body here, about 2/3 of the way up the hook. Kind of play with it a little bit to get where you want it, and then you got to put a little bit more on to taper it just a little bit thicker up on the front end. There we go. You can see it's a little bit, and sometimes we have some stuff that sticks out just a little bit more than I like it too, because I like it closer to the body, so just come in and kind of trim some of the things that stick out a little bit and make it look a little, get a little cleaner look. Now the next thing I got to do is I got to cut some deer hair off a patch I have here. And I usually cut a pretty good chunk of it because I'm going to stack it and I've got to clean it. Some people use a little brush to get the underhair out. I sit here and I just use my fingers and it pulls it, and then just let it go before I stack it. And then we get it pretty much there, and then I'm going to run it through the stacker, and then I'll do some more things to it here in a minute. Make a lot of noise for you. If it works right, you got something that's pretty square on the end. Now there's a little bit much there right now, so one of the things I do is I come back in, I start peeling off the short stuff so I don't run into a problem when I'm tying, and get it down to about the size of stack I want. This is still just a titch heavy here. And the key to it is aesthetics. It depends on what size. This is a size 12, and I tied it a little bigger because I wanted it to be easier to see. But in reality, you see the ends come out a little bit uneven again, so I just stack it a second time, then I can use it. You know, you can see it better if I tie a little bigger one, but I tend to like to tie 14s and 16s when I'm fishing more than I do a 12, but this will help you visualize the fly a little better by having it smaller, bigger I mean. And there we go, and you can see about how much I got for this size. Next thing I do is I put my finger up there, and I want the tips to come almost to the tip of the tail from where I ended the dubbing. And I've got my thumb sitting right there, and then I'm going to switch hands, and I'm going to take and I'm going to tie that baby right in, right there. I'm going to do some real loose wraps at first, then I'm going to kind of pull them down. You can see it flares it out, and try to get it in fairly tight so it'll be manageable. And I use a 6/0 thread, so you have to be a little bit careful because 6/0 thread's not too tough to break. And then I'm going to trim that out of there, all that excess, if it wants to cooperate, which now it is. And then I build a bit of a thorax up with thread, and then after that I'm going to build it up some more with the same dubbing again. So I'm trying to really pin this down up on the front end here with the thorax. And that doesn't look too bad there. So we just leave it like that. A little more dubbing to build a thorax. Just a little bit heavier. Some folks like to use even finer dubbing than this. This dubbing I feel is fairly fine, but I think technically you could say it's kind of a medium dubbing. It's not as fine as some people would like to use, but I like it because I like the way it it looks. So we built the thorax, and then we get our finger up there and get all the material for the wing, and we pull it right back over all that deer material we had just sitting out there, and it builds a case and also a wing all in one shot. Get it in place, and then I pull it back. I don't know how well you can see this, but I pull it back over itself so that I can build kind of a knob, I guess you could call it a knob, up in the head area in order to raise this up a little bit. Otherwise it sits out too far, and this kind of builds up a stop. Sometimes you'll get a couple of fibers in there that get in your way, and you can clip those out as you go along, but see how it's sitting up a little better. And I'm from the new school. I use the tool for whip finishing. Some people like to just do it the old finger way, and I've been doing this a long time, but they made us good tools to use them, so I'm going to do it. Do one or two whip finishes on it. And you can use some glue. For the video here, I didn't bother to put the glue out, but you can put a little dab of glue under there where that thread is when you're done. And we're just about there. I kind of spread this wing out in a half circle here, you might say, and then I trim anything in there that appears to not belong there. Clean it up a little bit. Looking pretty good fly. Don't ever get discouraged, because if you tie a lousy one, just tie another one, and the lousy ones fish too, by the way. We tend to want to tie flies for the fishermen, as most people know, and that's all of us. We like something that looks good, but the fish like something that tastes good. So if it looks like they want to eat it, they're going to eat it. And there it is, pretty much complete. That one's a pretty good one. I see one more little bad spot in there I want to take care of, but there. And that's a very nice fly to fish. It sits in the water kind of at an angle. That's why it's designed the way it is. So in that film, and the rear end of the fly will sit down in the film, and of course this wing that we put up there will kind of lay on top of the film, and that makes it an emerger just before it gets ready to go for a flight. And it's a very, very effective fly when you're getting hatches. It really is.
Hi, I'm Chuck Collins, and I'm from Pocatello, Idaho, and today I'm going to be tying the Royal Humpy. Essentially, tying the Royal Humpy is more of a style of fly than anything, so you can use a variety of color combinations and sizes, anywhere from about a size 8, even larger if you're going to fish for like Atlantic salmon or steelhead, the floating fly, all the way down to a size 28. The main characteristic of a Royal Humpy is that it does have a white calf body wing, and I will start tying the fly now. A body that I've selected is going to be red, and so I use a red thread. I use the thread to make my body, and I tie my red thread in. I tie it back about 1/3 on the shank, and then I select some white calf hair, body hair, which I like to get the amount that's nice and straight if possible. A little bit of crinkle in it's just fine.
I stack the body hair in, I use a Mattarelli midge bobbin, or stacker, and I take off a portion of hair, and this is critical here to get the right amount of hair that gives a nice full bodied wing without having too much. And of course you need to, once you pull out the hair, you need to take the short hairs out by just simply stroking it while you're pinching the hair in one hand, stroking it with the other. Then you stack it in your midge bobbin and sit and tap it a couple times, which might annoy other people in the room, but it helps get the material lined up real nice and straight, just like this. You have to reverse, or I have to anyway, reverse the fly so that I got the wing material pointing forward. When I go to tie in the wings, I hold them down and tie them off to one side about the length that I want, and then I bring the material over on kind of a soft turn at first, then the next turn I pull down harder, and then I'll tie that material in, that winging material in real tight, and once I know I've got it so it isn't going to slip or I'm not going to pull on the thing, I then go in and take my scissors and I cut off the stub ends, and then I tie this all down real good, and I take the material, the winging material, and I go forward just a little bit more here. I stand it up and I tie the thread in at the very base, and I build that up to kind of hold to force that hair to go up. Ultimately I'm going to want a nice taper in front. Now you can see I've got all the hair standing up. Now I need to divide it. It becomes real nice to divide. It's where the pedestal vise works real good. Vise works really good because you can turn the vise a little bit and take a look at the angle of the vise. And I run 3 or 4 turns to split it one way, maybe even 5 if necessary, and then run the equal amount to go the other way. That's caused my wings to split. Here, I don't know if you can see that, but then I will go back and I will figure 8 about 3 or 4 times between the wings to kind of hold them up and divide them properly. Sometimes you even have to take and wrap your thread around the base of each wing a couple of times to kind of gather it in together. Now the next object when you're tying the humpy is you can see where the butts of the wings cause the fly to fall off here a little bit, and it would be very hard to tie a body in on that position because of that fall off of the hump. So what you do at this point, you got to put your tail in at this point, and what we're using here is basically moose body, which is nice and straight and fairly thick. I try to find some that's not too thick, or I use, if I want to use a little bit lighter, I use elk mane here. And there's other hairs that you can use, but those are the ones I almost always stay with because they're fairly stiff without being so stiff that the fly will bounce out of the fish's mouth. You want a little bit of give in it. And you stack those hairs. And I usually start by selecting a bigger bunch than I'm actually going to use, and then I can go in and I can pull. Some of them will be curved, and I don't need all of them. I usually thin it down to about 8 to 10 actual fibers that I need on these thicker hairs. And then I measure, I just take and hold it up to the fly and measure it so that the tail comes out about the size of the length of the body. And I pinch it in my left hand so I can tie that in. I usually start tying in any materials on my side of the hook towards my body and then roll it up onto the top. And that'll put it right into the position where I want it. And
If there's a little bit of a hair or two that I don't think's cooperating, I'll use these scissors to just take it, because I put in a little bit extra. It gives me a little bit of room to do that, take it out. Then I match up the stub coming off the tail with the stub coming off the wing and take and trim that right there. So that now, when I tie my fly, I basically end up with a nice tapered body right up there. And from there, it's much easier to tie the fly when you do that. And I like to use these iris scissors, which you just clamp down, to get in to really do fine work for cutting out hair, because they move in really, really nice. And they'll cut out the hair that you want to get out of the way. Now for the body on this, it's not like your standard humpy where you have to measure the body out to match and allow you some room for wings. I like to use regular deer hair. Coastal deer hair works real well. I try to get fine hair with the dark tips seem to be the best, and hair that doesn't have a whole lot of fuzz in the bottom if I can avoid it. And I'll cut out a fairly decent chunk of this hair, and I'll hold it up and I'll pinch up by one end and I'll just stroke out the shorter pieces until I get a fairly nice clump left without being overloaded. A lot of people that tie the doggone humpy will use too much hair. They use too much of everything, and when they get done, it's a really large, almost bizarre-looking fly. You want it to be big and buoyant without overdoing it. I tend to tie in by the end points. I clip those off. I then put those on the back, a little bit back from where I'm going to eventually put in my hackle, and I start tying that material on. Start tying that material on, again rolling it to the top of the hook. And I then use the thread just to build up my body, a nice tapered body. You can use floss. I know there are guys that use foam for the bodies. There's guys that use foam for the back. And all that material works. I like to have a thread body. I get plenty of buoyancy based on the deer hair itself, so I don't need to add all that other foam, and I can keep a fairly thin, sparse body. You notice I kept a hold of that material that I'm going to use for the back when I put in the thread body. That's another reason for not switching over and taking stuff off, so you can go ahead and put a new material in like floss. Floss does make a nice body, and it's kind of traditional, but the thread seems to work real well. And when you're tying these, you can use any number of color combinations that'll work for you. This red one obviously is very similar to the royal wolf, and is a very favorite color of a lot of folks out there who like to fish in a tractor type pattern. But another very nice combination that I use a lot is got a lime green body with a real light back, the white wings, and a grizzly hackle. And then there's combinations that are yellow with an Adams type hackle combination. And you can experiment, and it's a very effective fly. You can tie them real brushy hackles if you're going to be fishing a lot of rougher water, or you can tie them more sparse if you want to fish like spring creeks. A lot of people don't think of humpies as something that you would use on a spring creek, but they work very effectively, especially in the smaller sizes. Now, one thing, in order to make your hackle work better when you wrap it, you need to get a flat platform with your thread behind the wings, and then a tapered platform without any valleys or big bumps in it, so that your hackle will wrap around and around perfect, or close to perfect. If you have some hackles that stick out a little goofy, it'll be easy to trim them off. And you just start behind and just start rolling your hackle one right in front of the other And it goes pretty easily right behind, and then you need to get it right up behind those wings, and then you have to, in order, at least for me, pull those wings back, and the fly is pretty tough. You can kind of, you know, wrestle the materials into place. Now we might get a couple hackles that stick out, fibers that stick out on the front, but we could sit here and argue with the hackle and lose, or we can go ahead and tie our hackle off just like this, and then I like to use these iris scissors because they do fine work for cutting out the hackle without cutting the hackle you want, not just any old hackle. Some of the larger scissors, you get in there and you find out you just don't have it's not as easy to control what the scissor hack takes off. But you can get real fine with this material. And then, and also it's kind of nice at this point to let your thread just unwind a little bit and get a flatter thread. It makes for a little bit nicer head, I believe. And you can pull that material back and run that thread right up against it to kind of make sure your hackle is all standing up. Now I do a hand whip finish, and a lot of people use whip finishers, the Mattarellis or whatever, and they work great. I always seem to lose the instructions on them, so it's easier for me to just remember to do it by hand. And when I get to this point, of course, you can take and spread the wings out any old way you want, and then you have an option if you want. You can put some head cement on here and soak it in, and it'll set those wings in. But if you've gone ahead and you've used a whip finish, the fly isn't going to come apart without using head cement. And when you get done, ideally you'll have a fly that will set up with and set on its hackle tips on a flat surface or on the water with the tail coming out like that. And then, of course, with the white wings, when you get older, it makes it, or whether you're not older, it makes it an awful lot easier to see on the water and to tell where your fly is amongst other flies that are out on the water. And that's all there is to it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Marchando, and I'm from Glide, Oregon. I've been tying flies for a few years, and tonight this afternoon I'm going to be tying you a crystal caddis. This is an elk hair caddis pattern developed by Jack Dennis, but it's really a nice pattern that catches fish like crazy. And it's a real simple pattern to tie, and I'm going to rib it a little bit. I like to put a little rib on it. Get my ribbing working here. Where'd it go? I was going to rib it. Let's go away from that. The body is either hare's ear or squirrel, blended squirrel, which I have here, and this is blended squirrel, and I like to use that. And it's just dubbed on your hook shank here. We're going to just dub some here. And we're going to make a nice little tapered body with this. We're going to taper it back, get all the way back to the back, start here, and we're going to wind forward. Now this is a parachute caddis, so it's going to be quite interesting to see this pattern tied. And what we use is, I use crystal flash, and I use the pearlescent material. And I just pull out a little wad of it and clip that off, and we tie it on. We want to tie on a little extra here, and we're going to wrap it up, and we tie it on, and we're going to pull it up. We're going to tie in front of it, and we're going to pull it down here and loop it so we have a little extra to make a post for our hackle. And as you can see, we're going to catch it. There we go. Now we've got a little loop there. We get rid of this trash here in the front. We don't want that. And at this point, I keep the crystal flash long because it's easier to work with it. Now we're going to take and we're going to post this material here. Let's see if I can get this to work right. We're going to make a nice little post here, and you can see we're just going to wrap a post. We're just going to wrap her up here. Make sure we pull it up nice and snug. Get snug here. And this is really a great little pattern. I was kind of skeptical when I first saw it, but thought it'd be a hard one to tie, but it's really not that hard once you get the hang of it. And it catches fish like crazy. Oop. Oop. That's what happens if you aren't careful here. Let's go back. Here we go. We're going to get there. Now, I should have done this before. Now we got our post, and we have our crystal flash on the body, and I make it just back to the bend of the hook, and we cut it off. Now you should be able to see that really nice. And at this point, we're going to use, I like to use dark elk hair for this particular pattern. So we're just going to tie off a little clump of dark elk here, and we're going to stack it. Pull out all the trash first, put it in our stacker. We're going to stack it, and then we got them all nice and neat. Pull them out, and at this point, we're going to measure for our wing length. And we got the right wing length there, and we just grip it, and it should be up here where you can see this. We cut it off fairly close to our fingers. Now at this point, we're going to tilt this the wing post forward just a little bit, and then we're going to lay this butts right next to it that I just clipped off, and we're going to take 2 soft loops around it, then another one. I want to catch the ends, and then we'll pull her up tight. Once we pull her up tight, you've got that. And now, if you turn it over, you can see the nice little flash under there. And it's not a lot, but it really shows up good when it's out on the water. And at this point, I'm going to wrap it down real good. Now here is a point. You may want to put a drop of head cement right here. I didn't bring any with me right now, but you put a drop of head cement there, and that'll lock this wing in here so that it won't come out on you. Because if you aren't careful, you're going to get this where some of it will come out. So we wrap it down nice and tight. And for the next step, we do a couple of peacock curl. And this is going to be your thorax. We're going to tie in the peacock curl, wrap it on, wrap the thread forward. Then we're going to take the peacock curl and we're going to wrap it right forward, just 3 or 4 wraps, and we're going to tie it off. Cut these off out of the way. Now see, we've got a real nice little thorax. We've got a nice body, good shaped wing. Now we're going to take a brown hackle. And one of the things I like about parachute patterns is that you really, it's pretty hard to get a bad size for it. You can use almost any size you want. And then we tie it on right here in front of the wing. Tie it in really good. Then we wrap it up. Now, one important thing on wrapping posts, on all post patterns, is when you take your wraps, you take your first wrap, you don't count it, and you wrap it all the way to the top of the post. Then you wrap it down the fly. You don't wrap it up the post and then down. And I'll show you the reason for that. And I use 5, 6, maybe even 7 wraps. It depends on how much hackle I have. There we go. Now we got the hackle on there. And one of the reasons we wrap it down, it secures it. Because right now, I pull the hackle across and down in front of the fly, and I take my fingers, and I pull everything back, and then you can see my hackle's sticking out, but there's no barb sticking here in front. Now I can take 3 turns there, and pull it up, and I give it just a little tug, not too much, and then we cut it off. There we go. That was a little flyer there. I'm going to take and cut that guy out of there and get it out of the way. But if I didn't wrap down the post, when I pulled that all back, the hackle would have rolled right off, and it would have come undone on you, and you'd had to start all over again. And another thing, when I half hitch or whip finish, I just pull it up, I just grab hold of it and pull everything back, 4 wraps on my whip finish, and tie it off. Now we got the fly basically finished, but now we're going to cut the post off because we don't want it sticking up in the air. We just take our scissors and we cut her off. You got a little tiny shiny post there, and this thing will sparkle in the sunlight on the river, and you can really see it makes it fly very, very visible. And there you can see there's your elk-hair caddis. We got her all finished there. We pull up the wing, make sure it's where we want it, and you got an elk-hair caddis. And it's made with crystal flash. Caught some very nice fish on that fly. It's really good pattern. So that's the guy. We got her.